Morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, February 6th, 2018. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Johnson, and Figueroa Villa are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay. Let's start with the consent agenda items. Do we have any commissioner comments or any public comments on any of the consent?
We have no public comment cards, sir.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to item number 2A, which is the department's verbal presentation and discussion relative to the 2017 crime stats for homicides.
And please let the record reflect Commissioner Goldsmith is now present.
Commissioner, I think Chief Eisenberg. We do take it out of order in case it's not out.
Okay.
I'll find out where it is.
Okay, so then let's go to let's go to 2B and we'll go back to 2A. 2B is the report on teams 2, 3. Let's see, come on up. Do you have questions? Yeah, I do too. Okay. Sure, sir.
Good morning.
So let us go to our questions and then anything you want
I think it would be good to,
you wanna-
get an overview
Okay.
first,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Commander Jeff Burt, sitting in for Mr. Alicon. Couldn't be here today. In 2013, the department asked for an independent evaluation of teams as it had been online, teams 2, as it had been online with us since 2007. So Dr. Yoshida of Justice and Security Strategies got his own grant through the Justice Department in 2014. He's seated here with me, and he did some reports, and any questions, he's going to give a brief presentation, and any questions we'll try and answer.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here. You have in front of you a memo that outlines the findings of our studies and recommendations of our studies. I just want to say a few things about Teams 2 and the work that we did and the findings that we have. First of all, I think, and I know this is a very complex issue, very complex database, very complex answers, I'm afraid, to the questions about Teams 2. The data are enormous. I don't know how else to say it. When we first looked at the data, there were 40 million lines of data, and very complex in terms of where they're drawn from and how they're used. There are 15 separate databases that Teams 2 draws from, including use of force, complaints, et cetera, and other personnel data. The system was first developed in 2000 to 2007 as a result of the consent decree. So it's a good 15 to 18 years old, and I think that's important to recognize. This is the first time that it's been looked at since the consent decree, and I think that's also significant in that no changes to Teams 2 has been made at all since it was first put online in 2007. And so the work that we did was aimed at determining whether it was doing what it's supposed to do. And that is it identifying problematic officers? And the answer to that question is yes. Is it predicting or anticipating behaviors that's problematic? We don't know yet. We were not able to use our statistical analyses to do that kind of study. But we are working with UCLA to do so. Do AIs have an effect on use of force and on complaints? And AIs are the action items that are generated by Teams 2, and those are the ones that are emailed to officers and to supervisors. They have somewhat of an effect on use of force in terms of deterring behavior, but none on complaints. We looked at other types of things as well that are part of this system. I might add, too, that this system is very complex and complicated, and it's not easy to explain readily. The algorithms that are used are complicated. The way in which we analyze the data are very complicated, too. So the reports that you have we use social scientific methods, and those are the best ways to try to answer those questions. So I just want to lay that out as well. We're suggesting a number of different changes within Teams 2, and the first one is that the peer groups that are used to generate action items and other types of things, those peer groups need to be broken down. They need to be changed. They haven't been changed, like I said, in 11 years. We're suggesting that we look at peer groups by bureau, perhaps, break down the largest group right now, which is patrol. So the patrol peer group consists of 3,000 officers. So that means it goes across the city. We think it makes more sense to break it down by the 4 bureaus and see what happens with those. We also think that Teams 2 should include detention officers. Right now, it does not. That's a civilian group, so they're not included in Teams 2. So we think that should happen. We think also that all the other peer groups need to be re-examined just to see if they align properly and they make sense. Third, we found that one of the critical events, which is lawsuits and claims, really doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't help at all. In fact, it's redundant. The lawsuits and claims are generated usually from use of force or complaints, and therefore, in a lot of ways, they're double counted. They also take longer for them to get into the system. So there's an enormous lag time between the time of an incident and a lawsuit being filed. So the effect of that in Teams would be minimal anyway. Also, when an action item is generated, a supervisor gets that item, and he or she is the first line of reviewing the action item. Part of the system says that that officer should be reviewed for the past 7 DPs for uses of force, 13 for a complaint. So the supervisor will look only at 7 DPs and then 13 DPs. We're suggesting that they take a longer look beyond 13, maybe up to 5 years of officer behavior to see if that makes a difference. And again, all of these things can be tested. Right now, the system is being realigned and redesigned to make it easier to use, and that's one of the other problems of it. It's very hard to use, hard to follow. Lastly, we recommend that the department put together a Teams 3 committee to look at and determine the ramifications for all of the operational issues of a revised system. Obviously, include discussions with the commission, with the union, and ITB and others in taking another look at how and in what way Teams 3 could assist the department. So that's really it.
Teams was mandated as part of the consent decree.
That's correct.
And then it went into effect 11 years ago?
That's
Or
correct.
10 years ago.
March of 2007.
Okay, and we've kept it in effect ever since, even though we're not under the consent decree anymore. The spirit of what Teams was recommended to do in the consent decree, do you believe that we've carried that out?
Yes.
Yeah. And also, and what you're saying is anything after 10 years is subject to improvement, tweaking, seeing what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and now you're saying let's go to the next generation.
That's correct.
Okay.
All the recommendations make sense, and I think the concept behind Teams is very valuable in using technology as a as a tool to point out problems before they become bigger problems is incredibly valuable. How long does the department anticipate it taking to put these changes into effect, the recommendations?
I would have to just double check with ITD. We've been in the meetings with Teams 3 folks, and I know that some of the Teams 3, to streamline it, to make it easier, is looking at coming on later this year, but I can get you exact dates for the whole process.
Okay, that'd be great if you could get back to us.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but good morning. But I did read the report thoroughly. I had a quick question. There's a place in the report where you talk about the potential predictive capacity of teams with respect to individual officer behavior. Could you tell me a little bit about that? I was just curious.
Okay, so we could not predict or forecast from the current data officer behavior in the sense of saying this officer would or has the proclivities to do X, Y, and Z. The statistical methods we have right now are not there. We use social science methods, and they're regressions, and they just can't analyze the data in a proper way. So we're working with UCLA to use machine learning techniques, which is more complicated than I know personally, but I'm hopeful that we can put in factors, risk factors that may, for example, show and demonstrate some proclivities towards negative behavior, and also positive behavior. What kinds of things would demonstrate positive behavior? So, for instance, in prior research, they've shown that education makes a difference. Higher education makes a difference in terms of behavior. Years of experience makes a difference in behavior as well. Things of that nature are what we would consider looking at more closely.
And yeah, I guess I just want to be clear. I was interested in that particular passage. It was a little
Vague?
well, not vague. I guess I'll be interested in your continued work in that area. I was a little concerned, frankly, about the notion of predictive metrics to the point of the individual as opposed to a particular profile, because it
Understood.
just carries some, from my perspective, pretty ominous implications.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm interested in where that's going, what you anticipate actually doing. And as I said, I understand with respect to characteristics, profiles, education, that sort of thing, but was curious as to the degree to which you believed or it is contemplated that we could get to a level where we were essentially looking at or pre-screening or making judgments about individuals in advance of any actual conduct with respect to a certain profile.
Although I would add that even though we don't use analytics to do that, we do use past behavior to predict future behavior with the employees, and that's how they get into risk management and different issues where we do look at employees more closely, or we restrict their behaviors. We don't let them back in a field assignment, restrict from public contact, and that's all based on past behavior. But it's not a machine tool. It is a human evaluation aided by the alerts that come through Teams. So, it is used in that way, but it isn't an automatic thing that where the system spits out a recommendation.
No, and I certainly, I do understand that. I think I'm actually going to something that's a little more, that relies less on behavior and more on prediction. I'm clear about and absolutely concur with the idea that past behavior is a significant factor in, in both evaluation, assignment, and in discipline, et cetera. But I was just curious about that particular passage. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other, public comments on this item?
We have none, sir.
Do we have a motion to approve the department's report?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's go back to item number 2A.
Thank you.
Please let the record
Thank you.
reflect Commissioner McLean Hill is now present.
Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Justin Eisenberg. I'm Chief of Detectives.
Justin, speak into the mic.
Certainly. I'm Justin Eisenberg, Chief of Detectives, and I have Captain Billy Hayes with me, Commanding Officer of Robbery Homicide Division.
Morning, sir.
We've got a quick presentation for you to give you the highlights of what we saw in terms of trends with homicides in the city of Los Angeles for 2017. We did produce a report that was put out to the public and the media as well. We did a press conference on this last week. But I'd like to talk about a few highlights that stood out for last year. Last year, we ended up with 282 homicides, and that represented a 4% reduction in the city of Los Angeles compared to the previous year. In terms of clearance rates, we had a 73.4% clearance rate, which is very strong and an improvement from last year. Our gang-related homicides did go up slightly. We had 177 gang-related homicides last year in that number, which at the time of the report was about a 12% increase in gang homicides. Although a very positive note is in Operation South Bureau, they saw a decline in gang-related homicides, and we have the highest concentration of gangs there. So we did see that in 2017, 75% of our homicides involved a firearm as the primary weapon in the murder. And compared to previous years, when it came to gang-related homicides, we saw an increase also in gang-related homicides involving firearms. Gang-related homicides involving firearms went to 93% of our cases.
It's a loud ring.
Last year, we started
Hold on one
tracking.
second.
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you. Last year, we started taking a look a little closer at how the homeless population is impacted by homicides as well. And we had 44 victims of homicide who were homeless last year, and 33 suspects involved in these murders. Approximately, as we looked at the demographics, we looked at the profile of our victims and suspects, we saw a few things too that were unique, and this was something new we did last year, doing a little deeper analysis as to who's getting involved in these killings and who are the victims. 9 out of 10 of our homicide victims were men. 60% of our victims were between 18 and 35 years old. 84% of our victims had an education level of high school or less. Our suspects, 90% of them are also males. And of our suspects, 70% were between the ages of 18 and 35, so very similar trends between the suspects and victims, although suspects were a little younger overall. And 87% of our suspects had high school or less in terms of education. So what that told us, again, is that the things that we're doing as a city to invest in these communities is valuable in terms of bringing people up with their education levels, impacting our homeless population so there's less of them, they're victims. Things like that matter. They reduce homicides. I'd like to talk just briefly about some very good things that happened with these tragedies. Some things that are in these clearances were cases that were solved that were many years old. I'm just going to hit the highlights because there's a lot to discuss in these matters. But we did, in this group of cases solved last year, solve a case that was from 1968, one of the oldest cold cases we've ever solved. I think the oldest or the second oldest, if I'm correct.
50 years.
That was one in the Wilshire area. We solved that one through DNA with our cold case detectives. We had a very significant case that we've been working on for about 5 years or more out of Hollenbeck, where 2 women were killed in 2011, and their bodies were dumped along the 5 freeway. And we solved that case as well through Familia DNA, which is only the second time we've ever used that technology, DNA in that fashion, to come up with our suspects. That was a great case. And then we had the 1993 Burlington fire case that was solved. That was an arson homicide. We had 12 victims there in '93. And robbery homicide took a fresh look at that last year, and we're able to solve that case as well, and 3 are in custody for that murder, or those 12 murders, one of the worst murders we've seen in our city. So we had a lot of good things last year in terms of positives in all this tragedy. You know, we did see a decrease in our overall murders. We did see an improvement in our clearance rate. In terms of the big picture, there's a lot of things that I think are reasons why. One of the reasons why I think is we did focus even more so than ever on getting guns off the street, and we saw more guns were taken off the street last year in our contacts. We had less shooting victims last year, and about a 10% reduction in shooting victims is going to give you less homicides. It's basically roughly 1 in 5 shooting victims results in a homicide. So that helped. I think there's been advances also in DNA that are benefiting us in terms of solving crimes, and we're exploiting that also in terms of how we analyze crimes evidence. But ultimately, the bottom line is, for the last 8 years, we've seen under 300 homicides. And again, last year we had less homicides than Chicago, less than New York City, less than Philadelphia. But for the last 8 years, again, I think the strategies that our chief of police has put in place are paying these dividends in terms of less victims of murder and less shooting victims. And really that the overarching strategy that's been put in place by our chief and also by our city leaders with the investment in grid and so forth and the things that they're doing is a huge emphasis on community trust, because that trust is bringing people forward. As example with that Burlington fire, people are willing to come talk to us, tell us what's going on, tell us who's got the guns out there, who's involved in these cases. And without that, we're not going to solve these crimes with all the technology. So that's the end of my comments. I'll turn it over to Captain Hayes as well if he has anything he'd like to add. He's the steward of the Robbery Homicide Division ship, and he's doing an incredible job for the city.
Captain?
Not much. I mean, the biggest thing, excuse me, that we've been seeing are the advances in the technology of forensics. When you look at it, the 1968 case that we were referring to, when that started, blood typing was the major issue with that. Fortunately, we were able to maintain the evidence from that case, and over the years looked at it, and as technology came online, and you looked at it, DNA originally, you needed a sample the size of a lake to be able to get something out of it, and the forensics has gotten it down to where it's touch DNA. We were able to examine that and go back to look at it again and again until ultimately we were able to develop a profile from the victim's clothing to enter it into the system, and we're able to identify who the suspect was. The suspect had already been deceased, but been in prison in Ohio for another murder, but it turned out he was a serial killer and had actually also been involved in a murder in Orange County. So we continually look at those advances. The other, obviously, is the familial DNA and using that. The 2 young ladies that were murdered in Hollenbeck, both of them were taken in 2011 and then dumped alongside the freeway. We were able to connect them. And again, part of the DNA was one of the samples was so small we were reluctant to use it originally, and then we're able to do it to connect the 2 cases and then identify an individual through familial that had been arrested on other charges, and then find the family member that was responsible for it. All of those are significant in taking these violent predators off the streets. So those are the things that we continually do, and I think the important thing for people to know is that we don't just walk away from the cases. At 5 years they do go into a cold case status, but we continually look at them, and that's evidenced by going back to a 1968 case and being able to resolve that. So we continually look forward and put the emphasis on these cases. The other thing that we've done is weekly, a member of the Chief of Detective Staff and myself meet with the senior investigators throughout the city that have had a homicide or a sexual assault case in their area, and we sit down and discuss those cases, more to see what strategies are available to them, and then leverage the forensics with the lab personnel there so that we can put priorities on things and discover what is most available to help us try and solve those cases. So I think all of those have been significant in moving cases forward, and the results that you're getting with a 73% clearance rate.
Great.
Questions?
I just have a couple of comments and one related question. I think this is an area that the department has done a fantastic job, both on the number of homicides, gun violence overall, and the clearance rate. When I came on the commission in 2015, we were really trending to be north of 300. 2016 looked bad, and then but the strategies that were put in place to really address this have clearly worked, and a true round of applause for that hard work. It is a little bit concerning that gang-related homicides are creeping back up, given that that is the majority of the homicides. But I do think that the tactics that the department has in place are working, and the expansion of Metro is still important. Another thing that just has jumped out at me, and really looking at in comparison to other cities, is our clearance rate. So many of our other cities have clearance rates well below 50%. So the fact, it's not just DNA and technology, because all of these cities have access to the technology and the DNA. At least anecdotally, I'd like to hear from you. I hear that a lot of it is because we've done a lot of work in building that trust in communities, so that there's a lot more cooperation, and it's that human intel. It's the tips that you're getting from people on the street that are really helping drive those clearance rates up. So curious if what your thoughts are on that.
Couldn't agree with you more.
I think that's some of it, but I also think it is the technology. A lot of the places have surveillance equipment now, and we're able to leverage that and use that to point us in the right directions. And then we can go to the community and look for assistance. But I think that type of technology is significant, where it didn't exist years before. And then putting the resources into the investigations immediately, putting those resources on them, because we're able to go out and gather that intelligence and put the pieces together.
A couple of other things, Commissioner, that are in place that affect the clearance rate. One is we have a two-tiered investigative system. Robbery Homicide Division does not handle all of the homicides in Los Angeles. They handle the homicides that are going to require significant resources or significant time investment, and the other homicides are handled divisionally. And there's advantages to both systems, and we have the best of both worlds. So there are many agencies that have centralized homicides in big cities, and then you lose the family contact that is so important, particularly in gang-related homicides. That's how you solve gang-related homicides, is close contact with the family and the neighborhood, and that is best achieved by detectives that work that area all the time. Whereas the bigger cases, that we call them bigger cases, but they're what they are is more complicated cases that require a different strategy, more forensic based, often go to robbery homicide. And so they can invest years in a case. And in a case such as Lonnie Franklin or others that is going to have a 10-year court timeline, is best handled by robbery homicide because of that. So that two-layered system works. And then the other thing is that our labs report to the chief of detectives, and that is unique in policing. And so while there are downsides to it that are discussed, there's a tremendous upside to it in that the chief of detectives can direct priorities. And so when they have their weekly homicide meetings, and every detective in the city that had caught a homicide that week comes in and sits in front of the chief of detectives and the captain of robbery homicide and the lab folks, they can work towards a solution on a crime that has the department's highest priority. So there's a couple of big ticket things that affect our clearance rate, and then cold cases. The 12 people in the Burlington fire, that goes directly against the year's clearance rates, as do any multiple victim clearance, and so those are big things. When the cold case unit, when they reach back in time, they make a huge difference, and so we never let those things go, and that, I think, actually shows the heart of the detectives.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have the benefit of the perspective that Commissioner Johnson brings to this conversation, but I too want to to applaud the department and to note the significance of both the number of homicides in terms of the overall decrease and also the importance of the clearance rate. I also want to specifically note the significance and importance of the data, the demographic data that you reviewed and that you have made public with respect to this annual look at homicides. All too often we talk about crime in terms of perpetrators and suppression and the work that we do to combat it. I think it's very, very, very important and significant that we keep in mind the victims of crime.
Yes.
And that we look closely at, who's being impacted, who's dying.
Mm-hmm.
And it does underscore the role when you start to disaggregate both the victims of crime and those who are committing these crimes. It underscores the role of and the importance of partnerships and of the investment of others outside of law enforcement. I mean, we pick up the back end, but it is significant that we have the investment in GRID, that we share with, and that we underscore the importance of, of schools, that we don't overlook the hard work that community-based organizations are putting into investing in these neighborhoods and seeking to impact the trajectory of these young people. And so, it's obviously these multi-pronged strategies have been working. I just did want to both say, congrats to the department, but also I also do appreciate every time that you acknowledge that there is a lot of help out there and getting to a point where we are, continuing to diminish this particular impact, especially gang violence, is going to require additional and continued investment in order to impact those numbers. But in the meantime, thank you.
Commissioner Goldsmith.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. I want to echo my colleagues' acknowledgement of the considerable progress that's been made and also the holistic approach you're taking both to the data and to looking at the multiple ways that we can address these issues that fall outside of law enforcement intervention in particular. And wondered if you could just share briefly how you do work with GRID and how GRID is playing a role in addressing gang crime in general, gang homicides in particular.
GRID is in our most impacted gang areas throughout the city, and the city continues to invest in GRID, and Summer Night Lights is another aspect that plays a big role, where these parks where we have high concentrations of gang activities have very positive opportunities for those that live in the neighborhoods. But GRID is also a tool that our bureaus and our area COs and our gang units and our community relations officers will lean on when there is a shooting and they're looking for intervention to stop the cycle of violence and prevent the retaliation, or to quell rumors. Then they'll reach out to the intervention worker, sometimes former gang members who have some credibility and can reach individuals that are involved in these crimes in a different way than we can. And working together, and it's a routine thing. It's pretty much turnkey. If there's a gang shooting, there's going to be an outreach to that GRID contact, that intervention worker for your area, to just start working on solutions together through two different tiers, but working very closely together. Here's the rumors that we're hearing, can you quell that? Or if you could settle this activity down, we'll move some resources over here to try and suppress and prevent. Or we know this is our player that we need to really focus on, who's really involved in these shootings. Because what we also see is that it's sometimes a small percentage of a gang, a small number of individuals of a larger gang that are really involved in this extreme violence, that are really doing these shootings and are involved in this kind of thing. And sometimes if we get that person off the streets, it really quells it sort of deflates the whole gang in terms of their boldness, their willingness, because their alpha male basically killer is no longer in play. So it settles things down. So it's really important for us to focus on the right people, using our means, using support from the community, information from who's out there really active, and what we're seeing in terms of the people we're having multiple contacts with. We got to get the right people, because if we're focusing on the wrong people, then it sometimes can actually have a negative effect and inflame things and get less cooperation for us. So that's super important. So again, just to sum it up, I think that the city's investment in GRID has been great in the whole intervention process, and it has resulted in fewer homicides. It has given us an incredible tool to impact homicides.
Great, thank you. And one other question. You and I have talked a lot about the great work the department's doing around pre-arrest diversion for young people. And we know that results in a much lower recidivism rate down the line than if they were arrested and go through the juvenile justice system. So could you talk a little bit about how the pre-arrest diversion work that you're doing with young people, and how you see that as on the GRID is more the intervention side, sort of after the fact, and the work you're doing around pre-arrest diversion is really helpful on the prevention side? Certainly.
Yeah, pre-arrest diversion is a powerful tool that's still developing in terms of its impact on the organization and the county as well. It's still growing as a strategy and as a resource and a tool. But there's a couple. The primary provider of pre-arrest diversion is, as you know, is Centinela, and Centinela is a group that we work with, and I think it's up to 11 stations now are getting referrals from LAPD. And as a matter of fact, I believe March 1st or 2nd, there's going to be another diversion conference, which I assume I'll see you there. And there's going to be some discussions about funding opportunities for Centinela and other providers. And we're going to be talking about how this is impacting us in Los Angeles and LAPD in particular. But there's also another opportunity with post-arrest diversion, which is through the teen court. And there's a judge that runs the teen court, Judge Wesley, who I think you're going to have an opportunity to meet soon as well, and we'll hook you two up. But that's another program where, even though it's post-arrest, the individuals involved in this program have an opportunity to have expunge their record, essentially, if they just comply with the terms of their of this process. But what's unique about teen court and post-arrest diversion, essentially, is that they have their own peers who are sitting in judgment of them. And I've been down to Southwest to observe it at one of the local high schools there, see it in progress, and it's just amazing the commitment of these judges, frankly, that are just volunteering their time. These are full-time judges to sit on this teen court and hear these cases about cyberbullying or theft or low-level crimes involving youth. And when it's coming from their peers, from other students, other people their age, in terms of the sanctions and the judgment of the conduct, it just seems to have that much more impact. So these are exciting areas for the department to continue to expand upon. Funding is always an issue. There's only so much capacity. And from my last discussion...
You mean funding and capacity for the nonprofit community-based service providers? Yeah.
Exactly. As recently as yesterday, I was actually speaking to my CEO from Juvenile Division, who's kind of taking the point on diversion for the department, who you've met, Espinoza. And I understand that currently, from what he tells me, that Centinela is almost at capacity with what they can handle in terms of case management. So looking at other opportunities for funding, which we hope will get some good news here in the upcoming weeks, in March, when we have our summit. That's the ticket. And I know that the state has released some funds, and there's a new office of diversion in the county that's going to have, I think they got something like $7 million to dole out. So there's hope. And I know you're very much involved and very concerned about this issue. So I share your perspective on it, that I think it's very important, and it is the future. Because again, we can't arrest our way out of these problems that we're faced with, and sometimes people do need a second chance. Obviously, many times, and there's opportunities to reform and get people on the right track before they go into gangs and get into hard crime that it becomes hard to straighten out at that point. So again, we'll have more conversations on this, you and I, I'm certain.
Well, thank you so much for your work on this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to focus for a minute on the one area that is dramatically increasing, and that is homicides in the homeless community.
Yes.
So obviously the homeless community is growing leaps and bounds, so therefore there's potential for more More homicides, but when you, let's talk about the overlap between, are they gang-related, property crime-related, drug-related, mental health-related? In the homeless population, when homicides occur in this population, is it different than outside the population, the trigger for the homicide?
Yeah.
And do you keep track of that?
I'll give the big picture perspective, and I'll let Captain Hayes speak
Yeah.
to this as
Yeah.
well. But the big picture perspective is that, for instance, in Central Bureau, in Central area where they have Skid Row, they have the biggest
Sure.
concentration of homeless in the city. They did experience a pretty significant increase in homicides for that area, with 10 more homicides last year compared to the year prior. And they're doing a full court press to try and address all the issues that they're dealing with and the challenges, and they're doing their absolute best. But the homeless population is expanding, and it's basically at a crisis level at this point, and it's pretty self-evident to all of us that that's what we're seeing. And in terms of what the issues are that are driving the homicides, drugs, mental health issues, those are some of the main issues that are driving some of these homicides. Disputes that are occurring, people quick to go to a weapon and assault somebody in a very violent manner in this population. It is a crisis, and I know everybody's got their eyes focused on it and they're looking for good solutions. But with that, Billy, have you seen anything else you'd like to share?
But the
Some of these
gangs in
cases.
relation to homicides and the homeless,
The gangs don't seem to be
Not really
the
the issue.
bigger factor. The thing that you're seeing more of is, as you indicated, mental health issues and drugs and the disputes around both. Individuals, those getting into disputes in those confined areas, usually in the homeless encampments that you're seeing, some form of dispute that results, and then the individual goes to a violent act that ends up in the death. There was one or two that were directed at the homeless individuals from outside individuals, but those were also people that were involved in narcotics activity that resulted in those. So the trend seems to be more mental health, narcotics related, that end up in a dispute of some sort and a violent act rather than gang issues.
okay. Chief, final comments on this?
The only thing I would add on the homeless side is, as the population increases, the struggle over territory increases also. And so we see the territorial disputes, and so that leads to the friction. And then when you add the mental health issues and then the substance abuse issues, it is not a good recipe. One thing I would like to add, I'd like to thank Justin and Bill for their diligent work on this. I added a lot of data sets to this, and I invite the commission, if you're interested in seeing something different in the next homicide report, because homicide is a good microcosm in which to study behavior in the city as a whole, because we know so much about the victims. That's why we can talk about education level of the victims. That's why we can talk about employment. That's why we can talk about their economic status. All of these things, because the homicide detectives know them intimately because of their involvement with the families in the case. So it is a good way to look through a smaller lens at crime in general in the city. So if you have things that you would be interested in, you can mention them to me or to Justin or Bill, and we'll see if they can be included. Okay. But you got to move fast because the year progresses.
Commissioner Goldsmith?
So we can't go too far into the year and add things. So
One that jumps for me would be triggers. What are the first things that happen? A homicide you get to the 10 scale, you get to the end. But are there different triggers in different types of situations that we can deal with? The triggers versus the result. You don't have to answer that now, but let's let Commissioner Goldsmith close it out.
Yeah, to the chief's point, just really appreciate the commitment on the part of the department toward data-driven analysis and solutions, and the transparency and allowing the entire public to be able to grapple with these issues as a result of you producing such rigorous reports. And just to follow up on the the issue of people who are experiencing homelessness. I appreciate you raising that, and obviously I want to acknowledge the Los Angeles Times article recently that's examining the number of homeless arrests and citations. As you said, we can't arrest our way out of these big societal problems. We all agree that law enforcement is not the solution to homelessness. Housing and services is the solution to homelessness. And as a result, I know the department has adopted a policy and a practice of using law enforcement as a last resort, which I credit the department for, and has expanded HOPE teams, which is a really important way to do outreach and provide services in addition to addressing public safety issues. But I did just want to say that my colleague on the commission, Figuerovia, and I are part of the homeless subcommittee, and we have been working with the department for a couple of months on a report that's coming out at the end of February that examines these issues related to how we code people who are experiencing homelessness, really getting underneath the numbers in terms of citations and arrests, what's leading to these citations and arrests. Is it calls for service? Is it officer observation? What are the sort of underlying issues? And what are the other tools that we have in our toolbox that relate to law enforcement but are outside of law enforcement, like outreach services, sanitation, city attorney, citation clinics? So many of these issues will be addressed in this report coming out in a couple of weeks. Some of them will take more time to examine, but I did just want to acknowledge that, and we are looking forward to continuing to work with the department on addressing these issues.
Look forward to reading that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Do we have
Thank you.
public comment on this item?
Excuse me, we have 5 public comments.
Okay.
We have Philip Malik, followed by Jeremy Trumer and Melina Abdullah.
This is 2A.
2As.
Okay. Morning, sir.
Morning. I'm the father of Eric Rivera. He was murdered June 6th, 2017 by your LAPD Harbor Division officers. It's important to say that Eric was simply walking down the street, minding his own business, and the day before, your officers, there was a 17-year-old that died. He was shot on his porch, and your officers the very next day are running around the city trying to find who did it or something. That is bad police work. When your officers approached my son, your officers got out of the car, their police cruiser, and they left it in drive. That's bad police training. Your officer hurt himself with his own vehicle. That's just stupidity. After that, your officers pointed weapons at my son and told him to get down on the floor. And at the same time, you launched a police cruiser at him and gave him the choice either to get ran over by a car or get shot. So what did your officers do? They shot him 7 times, 3 from behind, and they ran him over with this police cruiser. 1 in the head. 1 in the back of the head. This is really bad police work. I don't know what you're training these police officers, but it should not be training them to kill citizens that are simply walking down the street. My son had a toy with him, and it looked like Buzz Lightyear's ray gun. It was simply a toy. And if your officers can't tell the difference between a toy and a real gun, they should all be fired.
That's right. That's right.
Another thing, you guys did not check on him when he was on the floor for about 30 minutes, but you did check on your officer. That is terrible.
Jeremy Trumer.
So there's a lot of talk about the cold case unit. Sounds like they've been doing a lot of hard work. They even solved a case from 1968. That's 50 years ago. Family finally got closure after 50 years. But sadly, there's still so many Los Angeles murders where no one has ever been prosecuted, and the families of the victims have never been given closure. In fact, there's one group in LA County that has killed over 300 people in just the last 5 years, and yet not a single member of this group has been prosecuted. That's right. That group is law enforcement. That group is you. The cold case unit should maybe look into some officer-involved shootings. Seems like y'all have a bunch of cases in that category that have gone pretty cold. Seems like maybe in 2059 we'll find out what happened to John Horton. It's 50 years after the murder committed. Maybe 2066 we'll find out what happened to Arkisha Wilson. And maybe y'all can look at the case of Eric Rivera before you get to crimes from the Eisenhower administration. Hopefully Eric Rivera's family won't have to wait until 2067 for the people who killed him to be brought to justice. But if they do, you can bet they're going to be here every single week until that happens.
Melina Abdullah, followed by Pete White.
So I'm at 37 seconds to start? Okay. So there's a couple of things. One, as a professor who teaches ethnic studies, it's really important that we not dehumanize people. And your officer who just started talking about communities treated people as if they were animals in a jungle. When you talk about their alpha males, that's language for animals, not language for people. So your officers clearly need training with regard to what constitutes humanity. You cannot refer to people as their alpha males. We are people. We are people, right? I also want to say that one thing that I do agree with that came out is that a lot of this work should not be police work. When you're talking about mental health, when you're talking about services that are needed, when you're talking about after-school programs, when you talk about all of these things, this is not the work of LAPD. So if you really want to do a good job, then give those dollars back to the city. Shane Goldsmith, you have a good relationship, very close relationship with the mayor. Tell him to stop giving 54% of the city's general fund to LAPD and give those dollars to mental health workers. Tell him to give them to after-school providers. Police are not coaches. They are not social workers. They are not mental health workers. Finally, when we talk about criminalization, there's a big piece of this report that's missing. LAPD is responsible for anywhere to from 6 to 8% of the homicides in this city. I want that report. I want that report. Waukesha Wilson's mother and auntie want that report. Eric Rivera's family want that report, right? And when we talk about criminalization, let's criminalize the officers who are killing our people, and let's criminalize the city that is allowing the houseless community to grow like you said by leaps and bounds.
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker, please, Pete White, followed by Hamid Khan and Jamie Garcia.
You know, it was once said, particularly in this room, believe none of what you see, well, half of what you see and none of what you hear. It's interesting when you talked about 10 more homicides in the area and you said Central Division. You said the Central area as if Central area only covered Skid Row. Your question should have been, what actual area covers Central where these 10 homicides took place? They automatically steered you into believing Central Division or Central area covered the black and brown areas, right, of Skid Row. So that's first and foremost. You can shake your head, sober off, but be really clear about the code switching that just happened in front of you, right? You should also never conflate homelessness, right, with the homicides in the area. The things that you attempted to do in the dehumanization process was talk about drugs, mental illness, and territorial disputes as being the reasons for homicides in the area, right? Now, everyone knows when you begin to talk about mental illness and the police department, the last thing that you want to connect is folks suffering with mental illness are violent. Research shows us that that is not true, but you allow an officer to come up here and talk about they are violent in a disputed area, in a disputed territory. it's interesting, if we are talking about disputed territories, then we would have to think about the role that the LAPD plays in gentrification and creates these disputes in our communities, right? And so 10 more homicides in the area, I want to know what area, right? I want to hear beyond the bullshit around mental illness and drugs being the predeterminate factors. Ask real fucking questions of people who sit in front of you with this bullshit.
Hamid Khan.
Khan?
So picking up on Pete's comments about asking real questions about the bullshit that you heard was that what you heard was a spin on a lot of words, a spin on a lot of language. Because nobody over here asked that what is the level of false positives with all the programs that you have. Was Eric Rivera a collateral damage for them in this big fight over, gang reduction and gang activity and everything else? Nobody asked about the programs that they use. Nobody asked about the surveillance was mentioned. Where does laser program fit into this thing? Where does predictive policing go into this thing? I mean, when you look at the audit, there was a lot of talk, and this is just in the jargon, just for people to know, this is the language of community policing, which is fundamentally anchored in counterinsurgency. That's what it does. Nobody asked them about auditing this program, and I just want to give you one small example that in 2015, the Cal Gang database gang database was audited by the auditor in the state of California, and they found 42 names in there of children who were under 1 year old, out of which 26 were 9-month-old children who were supposed to be self-professed gang members. Right? So this is the kind of record keeping, this is the kind of information that we are dealing with, and you didn't hear anything at all from this body to ask these questions that can you clarify certain things for us? Because what we continue to see is not that they say that Shane Goldsmith, well, law enforcement is a last resort. No, law enforcement is the first resort. Law enforcement is the first resort where they kill, they murder, they maim, they engage in violence against people, and they police their way out of these problems. Going to Melina's point about investments in our youth, I mean, why is it that less than 1% of 1% by the city is invested in youth development? Because they police their way out of these problems. And you will see more and more Erics murdered, you'll see more and more young people murdered out in the street, and this is where this whole thing is heading.
Jamie Garcia.
Morning.
So I just kind of wanted to pick up off of Hamid's comments. So when we talked about these strategies in reducing homicides, a lot of talk was given to community policing and grid programs. But we've come here time and time again talking about what programs are being used in the community that directly and specifically were created for gang and gun violence. Laser was created for gang and gun violence. It was not mentioned at all in this presentation, and it surprises me because at the last meeting that we were at in the community, I said, is this program being used in this community? So officers took me aside and they said, yes, there are laser zones in this community. There are 2 laser zones in the northeast area, but we fail to continue to fail to not talk about these programs. So why is there a secret heat list on people? That we know it's not community policing, we know it's not relationship building, we know it's about surveillance. We know it's about creating a list of people that you're tracking and tracing through the community, that all this tracking and tracing is based on arrest, citation, and stop data, that you have people on this list that have not committed a crime, but that you're monitoring. So then how does this tie into what we've been saying about how law enforcement ends up being perpetrators of violence in the community as well? Is that these folks now are on this list. We don't even know how old they are. We don't even know if there's 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds on this list. So your interventions in homicides are actually probably creating homicides in the community, where a 16-year-old who's holding a toy ends up being gunned down by law enforcement. But we're not talking about it, so we're not able to draw these parallels. We're not auditing these programs, so we're not even being able to understand how effective they are. And it's really your responsibility to asking what these strategies are. I don't want to hear hoopla about grid, about community policing, because we know the community doesn't trust you. We've seen it in your surveys. We've seen it in bias policing reports. So start asking real questions.
And we have no other comments, sir?
Okay. Chief, before we start your comments, will you allow me to update the public regarding the process and the status of the selection of the next chief? Okay. The Board of Police Commissioners has begun this.
They didn't know you pivoted to the chief's report.
Let him go. Let him go. Let the liars go.
The Board of, thank you. Okay, the Board of Police Commissioners has begun the selection process for the Chief of Police. A subcommittee has been appointed pursuant to the charter. That subcommittee is myself and Vice President Matt Johnson to work with the General Manager of the City Personnel Department as defined in the city charter. Our Executive Director, Mr. T. Fank, has met with the General Manager of the City Personnel Department to begin the development of the process. Today, I'm going to take us through the last week in March of what will be happening between now and the last week in March. Next Tuesday, February 13th, Wendy Macy, who is the General Manager of the City Personnel Department, will present to the public and the Commission at our weekly meeting their role and their timeline for the recruitment process and various steps in their process. The Personnel Department will give this PowerPoint presentation again to the public. As part of that plan, the help wanted ad, if you will, or the brochure called, this was the old one, invites your interest for the Chief of Police, will be distributed on a national basis, and I'm going to read some of the areas it will be distributed to. Obviously, through the Personnel Department website, CalJobs, PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, International Association of Police Chiefs, California Police Chiefs Association, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, National Latino Peace Officers Association, International Association of Women Police, Hispanic American Police Command Officers Association, National Center for Women in Policing, National Black Police Association, I think I... Gee, I made a mistake and read the same one twice. Isn't that amazing? Hispanic American Police Command Officers. Also, Asian American Law Enforcement Association, Los Angeles Women Police Officers and Associates, et cetera, et cetera. We will be adding to those lists. The Commission will be having 6 community input sessions in various areas of the city over the next 2 weeks on separate days to give the public the opportunity to provide their input. The first 2 meetings and locations I will announce now. On Tuesday, February 13th at 6:30 p.m. at the Wilmington Senior Center Meeting Room, 1371 Eubank in Wilmington. On Thursday, February 15th at 6:30 p.m. I'm going to really butcher this one.
Would you like me to help, Mr. President?
Yeah, go ahead. Agbu Mangunian.
It's the AGBU Menugian Demergian
There you
School,
go.
6844 Oakdale Avenue, Canoga Park.
In Canoga Park. The other meetings for the community input meetings have been determined. I'll give you those dates now. We are waiting for verification of the locations within those areas. On Saturday, February 20th at 10 a.m., the meeting will be at 10 o'clock in the morning within the Valley Bureau. Location will be announced. On Tuesday, February 20th, Saturday is February 17th, I'm sorry. Saturday, February 17th. On Tuesday, February 20th, thank you, at 6:30 p.m., the meeting will be held in the South Bureau, location to be determined. On Wednesday, February 21st at 6:30 p.m., the meeting will be held in the Central Bureau, and on Saturday, February 24th at 10 a.m., the meeting will be held in the West Bureau. So our goal, our requirement for community meetings. In addition to that, to develop an online survey, an email address and mailing address for comments will occur during the month of February. During the month of March, at the beginning of March, the input taken from the different meetings commissioners have had, from these public meetings, input that we've gathered to date, will be used to finalize our Help Wanted ad, our new brochure, and that will be posted. Also, during that time period, we will discuss possible interview dates, interview questions, and the rating criteria within the Police Commission subcommittee. Resume packages will be accepted through March 23rd. Starting March 27th, which I'm not going to go into at this meeting, is an...
You ought to be talking about Waukesha Wilson's death.
On March...
That's what you should be talking about on March 27th.
Okay.
Waukesha Wilson's death.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, and we can talk about... We can talk about that during public comment.
That's what you should be talking about. So skip that and go on to the next one.
The personnel... in the last week in March, when we start the interviews, after the preliminary screening, when we start the interviews, whether there are 10 interviews or 100 interviews, all interviews will be conducted by the entire members, the entire police commission. We will meet the interviewees collectively. If you have any questions, again, we're all available to update. I will do this update every week publicly. The meeting locations and times will be posted online and distributed throughout the neighborhood council network and all council offices. Members of the commission have been meeting with clergy, discussing with other people who've been involved in this process before, have been meeting with council members, league representatives, community representatives, basically one at a time as we go, but we're going to be doing these collective meetings as well. Chief, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioners. A couple of things to comment on before I talk about crime statistics. One, we had an officer-involved shooting since we last met in Wilmington on February 2nd, 2018. At about 3:30 in the afternoon, uniformed officers assigned to Harbor Area Gang Enforcement Detail attempted to conduct a traffic stop on a reckless driver. Suspect failed to yield. A brief vehicle pursuit ensued, and the suspect's vehicle was involved in a traffic collision and came to rest at 300 West Opp Street. As the officers exited their vehicle, the suspect pointed a handgun, semi-automatic handgun at the officers, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. A fire department rescue ambulance was requested and transported the suspect to Harbor UCLA, where he remains in critical condition, and the suspect's loaded .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun was recovered at scene. No officers were injured. However, one civilian suffered a gunshot wound to the leg, an unintentional gunshot wound to the leg. Unclear at this point which weapon fired that gunshot. Force Investigation Division, as always, is assuming investigative responsibility for this, and we'll complete the investigation. Also, has been in the news and will be subject of a press conference later today by Chief of Detectives Eisenberg and the Captain of Robbery Homicide, Billy Hayes. On February 1st, shortly after midnight, Los Angeles Fire Department and LAPD resources responded to the Home Depot parking lot in Northeast Division for a fire in the north part of the parking lot where a suitcase had been lit on fire. The fire was put out, a large suitcase was opened, and inside of it were found dismembered body parts. Robbery Homicide Division, because of the nature of the crime, responded and began the investigation. And after reviewing video surveillance from the MTA, they observed a suspect with the same suitcase traveling on the train line with a bicycle. They found further surveillance, that video that led them to the Raymond Street area in Pasadena, where some local transients were able to provide the identity of the individual in possession of the suitcase, Valentino Gutierrez. Their statements also tied him to the murder. Gutierrez was arrested on February 2nd, 2018 at about 10 in the morning when he exited a homeless shelter by members of a special investigative section of Robbery Homicide Division. The follow-up on this investigation has led to a possible crime scene in an abandoned restaurant at California Street and Arroyo Parkway in the city of Pasadena. Robbery Homicide continues the investigation on this case. The victim has not been positively identified, but the suspect's significant other spouse is missing at this time. So that investigation continues. A really strong effort by Robbery Homicide led to an arrest before they've even been able to identify the victim. So I want to thank them for that and for their not only their dedication but their enthusiasm for solving the most difficult of cases. This week we will have our 4th annual Crime Fighters Conference in Los Angeles. Crime Fighters Conference is something that was asked of us by Department of Justice to work with cities that are struggling with their crime rates. We've had it in LA for the past 4 years, and we also had one in Chicago this year. There'll be 60 law enforcement professionals from over a dozen police departments, and where we will talk about various crime strategies. I know that Commissioner Johnson is speaking. I know some of the other commissioners will be in attendance. The mayor is speaking. I will speak, and we have the Deputy Attorney General also coming to speak. So that'll be a significant event, and that takes place this week. Crime stats, before I get to crime stats, one of the commissioners had inquired about elements of the DROP program, so I'll discuss that because it's been in the news. The DROP program has been in place for over 10 years. It is a contract negotiation between the city and the fire department and the police union. To change components of it would require similar negotiations between the city and both unions, and it is up for review, I believe, in the next year as a consequence of its regular review that is part of the system. Los Angeles Police Department has almost 1,000 members that are part of the DROP program. Some of those members spoke in front of you today. Vast majority of them complete their service in the DROP program without using excessive injury time or sick time. Matter of fact, many of them use no injury time or sick time. I think that it's important to recognize the department takes benefit abuses very seriously. I fire 2 to 3 members of this department every year and prosecute them vigorously when we discover benefit abuse. And certainly if we find folks that are enrolled in the DROP program that are guilty of either misconduct or criminal activity, we will pursue them to the ends of the earth, and we do. I look forward to working with the city and the unions to further craft the program so that it is free from any potential abuse. And it's an important piece of retention and hiring for the department, and I think that it deserves a significant review, but it also is something that's important to keep in place for continuity of operation. Crime statistics, we talked about homicide, so for extensively today. So far this year, homicides are down significantly from last year at this time. However, it's very early in the year, and it is much too soon to draw long-term conclusions. But homicides are down about 20% as compared to last year, and gang homicides are down about 40% as compared to last year. Again, first month, we have a long way to go, but these are good starts. I won't go into every aspect of crime because it is so early in the year. Overall violent crime is down about 2%, and property crime is down about 15%. Part 1 crime down about 12%. Numbers of victims shot down about 17%. So those are all important statistics. Traffic collisions, also, we have a good start to the year, down 2% overall, but down significantly in fatalities. We've had 16 fatalities so far this year to date, and last year at this time we had 21, and we had a reduction last year. So hopefully that trend will continue. These are very, very, very important issues that can be addressed not only by proper enforcement, but by working with Department of Transportation on environmental issues. Sworn personnel on payroll, we have 10,048 sworn members of the Los Angeles Police Department, 2,906 civilian members, over 400 reserve officers, and 1,850 young people in our cadet program. And that concludes my report.
Chief, I've got a question. I keep hearing a number, and so I did a little bit of research on it, but I wanted to ask you a question. What's our budget?
Well,
rough.
Our anticipated budget for next year will be $1.7 billion.
Okay, and what's a total city budget? About
Well, it depends. The proprietary, if you did
the whole budget.
Yeah. The proprietary department, not including the proprietary departments, I think it's about $5.6 billion.
Including proprietary?
I think that's not including.
That's included.
$9.2 billion budget.
That's correct. That's exactly right. Okay. So the total spent on policing is 1.7 to 9.2 is 17.5%, 17.5%. This discussion over and over again, louder and louder, and saying it over and over again doesn't make it true that 54% of our dollars go to LAPD. Wait, I'm speaking now. You have a chance to speak, so I'm going to call you out of order if you keep talking.
Stop lying.
Okay.
It's
So,
the mayor's own stats.
last warning. I'm speaking. You have a chance at public comment when I don't speak. So if you, okay. So the discussion is, there is no way we should continue to allow 54% of our dollars to go to LAPD, right? No. 54% of the budget unrestricted revenues go to
General fund.
This is your last warning. I'm not going to. Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting. Do you want to talk during public comment or not? In your class, you may be able to talk every time.
Not your class either. This is a public.
Professor Abdullah, will you leave the meeting?
No.
Can you escort Professor Abdullah out of the meeting? I've given her every opportunity. I'm sorry, you asked for it. So I will continue. So 54% of, then all, you can all.
Hell fucking no. Hell fucking no. Hell fucking no.
Okay, so Madam, would you sit down?
I left home in a hurry because I wanted to
Okay.
get your retirement.
We're going to take a recess. And we will come back in when Professor Abdullah, and the lady who's standing, that's your last warning. Okay, any other questions of the chief or Chief Cremello? Okay, let's go to to comment on
I
the-
actually did have a comment on the chief's report. He referenced a news story regarding DROP. The one that stood out for me this week was referenced previously by Commissioner Goldsmith, and that was the report relative to the criminalization of homelessness. I was curious, and I'm sorry the chief is not here. I was curious as to his reaction to that story. We've heard many times in the context of many reports before the commission regarding our approach to homelessness, so it was somewhat troubling to see a Times report which suggests that we are in fact, arresting or citing people who are houseless for things like sleeping on benches and contributing to a cycle of criminalization and ultimately incarceration. I wondered if the department, just on the top, has any, because I do know that data can be used to support almost any conclusion, and wondered if the department had any initial comment regarding that particular piece, and or if it would be more appropriate to wait until the report that Commissioner Goldsmith referenced, and I'm curious as to when that report would be before the body.
Preliminarily comment on that. I think the point made prior by Chief Beck and others that the actual use of law enforcement in the traditional mode and the traditional tools is truly a last resort. And I think the department has proven that their outreach efforts are something that are not just the du jour remedy or attempt to have an intervention, but they are truly part of the way we are doing our business in the outreach model. I think also it's very important to talk about, and I didn't hear it referenced earlier, about the training that the department gives, especially through MHIT. And the program, which is very intensive, a 40-hour course, and we know we're trying to reach out to the entire department, and our goal is within 2 years to reach that. But it truly changes not only the mindset of the officer who is having the primary contact with the homeless individuals on the street in a way that is profound and lasting, but the feedback that I believe we have seen already with the program, not only in its inception, but in its continued use, has been extremely beneficial to the community.
My question was specifically to the data relative to citations of homeless individuals and the inference, or not the inference actually, the direct assertion that there was an increase in that particular activity. And again, I'm happy to, if there isn't any, I mean, if we can't specifically reference that today, and you know, as I said, I'm open to the possibility that the data presented by the Times is interpreted in a way that doesn't correctly reflect what's occurring. But if you could speak to that, that would be great. Again, if it would be more appropriate to wait for the report, I'm happy to do that as well. I was just curious, and I am curious as to when we would see that report.
I think it's more appropriate to wait for the report at this point.
Okay.
Madam Commissioner, if I may
Sure.
interject, the report is due from the department on February 20th. It will
Right.
be the yearly report for 2017. A lot of what came in the article was not to be included in that report, so there might have to be a supplemental report if between now and the next 2 weeks they cannot gather all the information. But clearly, we will get with the department to try and have as much in the 2017 annual report to respond to the article as possible. If not, to bring that back as quickly as possible. You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any comments on the report of the Chief of Police?
Yes, sir. We have 3 comment cards. We have Philip Malik, Christine Gatson, and Hamid Khan.
Okay.
Hello. So I just heard Chief Charlie Beck mention how many people died in January, and he forgot to mention that Dexter White was shot by your police officers for having a cell phone. Also, hey, let's start this year off with I'll give you guys a couple of suggestions. Let's start treating the citizens nicely. Like an example is the Disneyland workers. When you go to Disneyland, they're very nice to you. But when we encounter LAPD officers, they're mean, nasty people. Another thing we could start doing is drug testing them, because your LAPD officers, a lot of them are steroided out of their mind. Another suggestion is technology. My 2008 BMW, when I get out of it and I leave it in drive, it puts itself in park. Where's your technology? Another very good suggestion is, on your guys' guns, let's put 3 rubber bullets first, and then lethal lead bullets. Why don't we do that? Where's your tasers? Rubber bullets. Let's not just kill somebody for no reason at first. Jump out of your car and just start shooting people. Imagine that being your children. Imagine that. You're lucky you live in a nice area. Even the shitty area around here costs $700,000. Remember that. Remember that. Okay? We work hard. Our citizens work hard for our homes. We pay a lot of money for them, and then our children get killed by your police officers?
Christine Gadsden.
I haven't even started talking yet. What the fuck? 15 seconds gone because I was taking a breath?
No, you can, I didn't touch the clock.
It's at 1:40, and I just started talking to ask you why the clock was already
We'll
running.
reset the clock for you, okay?
Thanks.
Okay. Welcome.
All right. Well, while you were running off having your little temper tantrum, we looked up the numbers, and we were wrong by 1%. It's actually that the LAPD gets 53% of the general budget, so please do forgive us on that 1% error. You said that community representatives have been invited to share input about the chief of police search process, but I wonder which community representatives have actually received those invitations. Have you received an invitation, Melina? Pete? Hamid? All right. Well, that answers a lot of questions. Why should we expect that you're going to pay attention to the community input that you are purportedly seeking? We show up every week to offer our input, and it is a rare occasion that we actually get eye contact from you, let alone your full attention. How can we expect the community to believe that you actually give a fuck about input regarding the search for a new chief? And I had comments for the chief, but he too took his ball and went home because he doesn't like hearing what we have to say. But he proudly said that he fires 2 or 3 people a year, like that's something. How many people have been killed in the past couple of years? 300? Then there should be at least that many police that have been fired.
Hamid Khan.
Mr. Khan?
So what you saw was a clear example of how mockery is made and how comments are discredited. And I'd ask some of you to open up on your cell phone and Cynthia McLean Hill if you want to go to the 2017-18 proposed budget. It clearly gives those details, and the previous speaker has already spoken about it. I think what we saw and what we continue to see is this spin on words, because these people are leading the department. They set the policy. They approve the budget process. They approve the monies that go in there too. Of course, nowhere would you hear the federal grants and the various amounts of money from the Urban Area Security Initiative, the Department of Homeland Security grants, various kinds of monies coming from Bureau of Justice Assistance, and all of these streams of funds. But this is the mayor's own document. This is the mayor's own document that we are looking at. And when you look at the budget summary, the pie in this budget summary, it goes unrestricted revenue is $4.8 billion, out of which what is the proposed budget? It is 70% for police and fire, out of which 52.8% goes to police and 17.2% goes to fire. Now, these are their own numbers. And when you start looking at the history, I mean, it was in 2012, 2013, it was at 55.6%. So Professor Abdullah's comment about 54%, really? I mean, like 1%, you're going to just, but it is intentional. We have to look at it. This is not just like, him just walking away and just kind of huffy and puffy about it. This is intentional because there's an intentionality to deny, there's an intentionality to mock, there's an intentionality to discredit. This is what these people do. If you remember, to derail, to discredit, to disrupt, and to neutralize. So they are trying to just make us look into liars. The same thing goes into biased policing report. The same thing goes into how they are murdering our kids out on the street.
Next speaker.
We have no other speaker cards on this item, sir.
Okay. Let's go to public comment.
We have public comment. We have 10 cards. The first 3 cards, Jacqueline Richardson, Laura Smith, and Philip Malik.
We're in public comment. Welcome.
This is in regard to holographs. LAPD Central may be acquainted with holographs even though they don't know it. When people come in and they report that somebody's been in their house or there's been a theft of these items and these items and these items, it may be holographs that are doing that. Donald Trump, they may be able to help a little bit with the holograph problem. Donald Trump also has a worldwide organization wherein he employs about thousands of holographs all over the world. He may be able to help with the holograph problem. He has people that watch and see how they act and react and so on, so he may be able to help with that problem of holographs. Also, if you can talk to a holograph, some of them, if you're really nice to them, they can tell you why they steal, and they don't think stealing is a problem. They call it borrowing. I don't know who's programming them to think this, but if a person were to talk to them about their stealing and all, they might be able to get some insights on how to stop them from doing that. The holographs live downtown Los Angeles in some of these apartment buildings. They need to stop their stealing. Some of the things that holographs do is they roll under doors real quick. You can't see them as they're rolling. They can also walk through walls. This sounds stupid, but there may be a way to stop them from rolling under doors and from walking through walls, and the cost may be very minimal. Hope the police department will be able to stop them from stealing, going in people's houses and stealing. And also, they're so quick. The item can be missing in a few seconds. Where did it go? Where did it go? If something happens that quickly, it's probably a holograph that's causing the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Laura Smith.
Regarding 1A, the verbal presentation about crime statistics for homicides, given that, as Chief Beck said, we know so much about the victims, how is it that the race of the victims was not included or discussed in the presentation today? Regarding 2B, Commissioner McLean-Hills said that she was a little concerned about the notion of predictive metrics to the point of the individual. Why there needs to be similar concern for the use of predictive analytics to the point of the individual when it comes to looking at people in the community? I'm curious to know more about the collaboration with UCLA. I want to know who the PI is there and learn more about that project that's integrating machine learning techniques to leverage this data. Is there someone I can ask about that or follow up with? Finally, these meetings need to be accessible. The regular weekly meeting time, Chief Frank, you're about to start laughing. The regular weekly meeting time needs to be in the evening. There needs to be free public parking. It is unacceptable that these meetings are here Tuesday mornings, and this needs to change, and we will.
Philip Malik, followed by Christine Gatson and Valerie Rivera.
Hello. So I'm the father of Eric Rivera. He was killed June 6th, 2017 by the LAPD Harbor Division. Eric was simply just walking down the street when your officers approached him and gave him, you guys created the scenario of letting him pick either to get down on the ground, get ran over by your police cruiser, or getting shot by the police. Your officers draw down on him, told him don't move, but at the same time you launched the police car at him. What kind of choice is that?
And he got both shot and ran over still.
And you shot him 3 times from behind, one in the back of the head, which killed him. Imagine getting that choice for life. Imagine that. You guys need to start changing your attitude over here. You guys need to start changing things around here. You need to start doing something. Just sitting on your benches and doing nothing. These are innocent children you guys are killing. Do something about it. You got to do something. Do something. You hear me? You got to do something. The community is upset with all this. It's happening way too often. We want these officers held accountable. Prosecute a couple of them. Put a fear in them so they won't just start shooting. The only reason they do that because you give them immunity.
Christine Gadsden.
You all should be embarrassed to sit on this board with Charlie Beck. When a community member was overcome with grief and talking about Waukesha Wilson's death, he sat there smiling at her, smirking, which is somehow even worse than smiling. And for the life of me, I can't understand why smirking is an acceptable human response to grief. I can't understand. Speaking of Waukesha Wilson, she should have turned 38 this past weekend. Almost 2 years.
Sunday, February the 4th. What were you guys doing? Watching the Super Bowl. While we took a knee. While we took a knee with our children and celebrating her life. That's what we were doing on Super Bowl day. So fuck Super Bowl. And you too if you watched it.
Almost.
Find that 22-minute video, Steve.
Almost 2 years after her death, her family and the community are still waiting to see that 22 minutes of missing video from the morning she died.
You just chuckled, Johnson, and put your head down. But let me tell you something. Waukesha case is closed in your book. It's not closed with us. Okay? Just like Robert Wagner case is being reopening now, Waukesha case one day is going to be reopened. That's right. And the truth, as we know it, is going to be told to the world. The facts are going to be known. Now you can chuckle, put your head down, that coward ass, girly fucking Beck can kiss my black ass.
Next speaker, please.
Valerie Rivera, followed by Paula Miner.
Keep thinking it's over. It's not over. It's not over. Not because on March 27th, on March 27th,
Next speaker,
the
please.
day of her death, you guys gonna have a meeting, right? But see, you already know you're gonna shut that down because you know we're gonna come here strong, full force. You know we're gonna be here.
Next
So
speaker, please.
I'm expecting now that I done put it out there that you guys might shut it down that day and have it for another day.
Next
But
speaker.
I'm gonna speak, I'm gonna talk about it, it's never gonna be over. Like that punk ass Beck told the news reporter, we'll never get closure. No, we will not, until you guys do the right thing. And what you put on that paper was a bunch of lies.
she have a card?
Yes, sir. No.
Come up to the microphone. Would you
I
come
don't
up to the
believe she
microphone?
has
Let's
the
just let her,
cards.
let's let her go ahead. Yeah, okay. We'll take your public comment now.
Thank you.
Thank
Can
you
you
very
state your name for the record?
Sheila Hines Brim,
Thank you.
B-R-I-M.
Thank you.
I'm Waukesha's aunt.
Okay, thank you.
Just like I stated before, a lot of cases have been reopened. And this Robert Wagner, who now allegedly killed his wife, one day and soon, maybe after Beck is gone, so many people pissed off at him in you guys' department, gonna come out and tell the truth. What did he do? Give them money? Give them a raise? To write that report? Because you guys didn't write it. I know you guys didn't write it because I talked to, I don't know, where in the hell is McCarthy and Detective Stone? Where are they? Don't you know those guys? Do you know those guys, Johnson? Do you know them? Well, I had a conversation with them and I got it on tape. And Beck, lying ass, said that there was no altercation when we clearly got it on tape. It's sadly that we can hire attorneys and for some reason they get on the police side and bargain, negotiate money without investigating and getting the facts of Waukesha case. That's what happened. Person, that attorney, other attorney.
Okay, next speaker, thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker, please, is Valerie Rivera, followed by Paula Miner.
Ms. Rivera?
These attorneys work with the police, and they want to get together and negotiate
Thank you.
some money without even investigating. And Cynthia McCall, I'd like to ask you, you're not meeting with Lisa now. What was the point of you meeting with Lisa doing before that thing came out? What was the point of that? And Johnson, you met with Lisa. What the hell was that all about? Meet me here.
Thank you. Thank you. You can have private discussions with the commissioners. Next speaker, please.
No, they need to answer.
Next speaker, please.
How are you guys having a meeting with her? What changed? You act like you guys were doing something. We don't need y'all's sympathy. We were looking for answers. We were looking for answers. And I'm going to tell you, to the day I die, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be looking at your face, all of you guys' face, because Waukesha Wilson did not take her life.
Next speaker, please.
The person that had the altercation with Waukesha is the killer. And you guys need to be doing something about that, because you know about it. Find that video.
Next speaker, please.
Find the video. Find the video. Release it.
They have it. They're holding it on.
20 minutes of the video is missing.
You saw what happened.
And want to show my sister some dry and cut fucking video of a sale. What the hell was that about?
Y'all gonna come off that video.
Next speaker, please.
In the punk ass vet, when he left here, he was chuckling and laughing. His day is coming.
Thank you. Next speaker.
His day is coming. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, and bet. Day is coming. And if you guys had anything to do with it, your day is coming.
Thank you. Next speaker. You'll have a chance to come back at public comment another time. I think we're going to go into closed session now. We'll go into closed session.
When the fuck I'll be back. Don't say a damn word to me.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items number 5A, 1, 2, and 3 in accordance to Government Code 54957.
Waukesha Wilson! Waukesha Wilson! Waukesha Wilson!
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. The Executive Director will report out.
Mr. Teefank?
Relevant to item 5A1, in custody death number 013-17, findings, tactics, tactical debrief 4 police officers, administrative disapproval 1 sergeant 3 police officers, drawing and exhibiting in policy 1 police officer, non-lethal use of force in policy 7 police officers, administrative disapproval out of policy 1 police officer, less lethal use of force in policy 1 sergeant, out of policy administrative disapproval 1 police officer. Case 5A2, officer involved shooting number 014-17, tactics administrative disapproval 1 police officer, drawing and exhibiting administrative disapproval 1 police officer, non-lethal out of policy administrative disapproval 1 police officer, lethal use of force out of policy administrative disapproval 1 police officer. As to item 5A3, officer involved shooting animal number 031-17, in policy 1 police officer 3, 1 police officer 1 for tactics, in policy 1 police officer 3, 1 police officer 1 for drawing and exhibiting, in policy 1 police officer 3, deadly use of force.
Any clarifications required of Mr.
The votes on items 1 and 2 were 5-0. The vote on item 5A3 was 4-0. Commissioner Soboroff was not present for that one.
Any clarifications requested?
Which case are you speaking to? There was only one police officer.
Right, and so it was administrative disapproval for which category?
All of them. Administrative disapproval out of policy for all categories.
For all categories.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there someone that can explain what happens now?
Not as part of this meeting. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, is there a meeting to adjourn, sir? Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Aye.